Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, and we want to begin reading with verse 33 and read down through verse 40. Verse 33, hear another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard and hedged it round about, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants, and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent to them his sons, saying, they will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord thereof, of the vineyard, cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? So he speaks this parable under a context of other issues, but we just want to look at this parable this morning. And in verse 34, I said, and when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. Good to see you guys this morning. All right, in Matthew chapter 21, we read verses 33 through 40. Verse 34, when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandman, that he might receive the fruits of it. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, in Luke chapter 20, we have Luke's account of this same parable, but he words this slightly different. Verse 10, and at the season he sent a servant to the husbandman, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. Not that they required them to turn over all the fruit, but a portion of the fruit. Now the question, was the householder wrong in expecting to receive from the husbandman of the fruit of the vineyard? Well, of course not. It belonged to him. It was his vineyard. He'd created the vineyard, he had prepared it, everything, and he let it out, or leased it out, if you will, to these husbandmen. As the owner, he had entrusted the keeping of his vineyard to their care as stewards. They did not own the vineyard. He did. And so that is our thought this morning, is stewardship. Stewardship. These husbandmen did wickedly when they sought to claim ownership of the vineyard for themselves. That's what he said, let us seize the vineyard here, or seize the inheritance. This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize his inheritance. Now, the parable and the context was pointing out the mismanagement of the Jewish kingdom by the leaders of the Jews. And Jesus, being the Son of God, is the heir, and they would conspire to kill him, that they might seize and continue to control the Jewish kingdom. But within this, there is a lesson for us that we can learn from this. There is a principle here, and that principle is the stewardship. And we look at the aspect of our mismanagement, of our material gain, or mammon, as the Scripture sometimes refers to it, resulting from our misconception of our ownership of it, rather than our stewardship of it. Now, as a kind of a side note, it's been a common practice down through the ages that a person with property and land would rent out or lease out part of it to those who own no land of their own to come in and live there and farm it. But in doing so, they owed to the landlord or the landowner a portion of that to pay the rent. So when harvest time came, a part of that, of what they grew, what they processed there, was owed to the landowner for their rent, for their being there. Now, there have been times in history when that has certainly been abused. History is full of abuse and man's inhumanity to his fellow man. That is true. But the principle, the idea that the land belonged to the landowner, that was his land to do with as he pleased. Now, where I grew up on one of the horse farms there in Kentucky, and the owner of that farm had a policy that he had houses there on the land that he allowed those who worked for him to live there on the farm. My dad was one of those people that lived there on the farm. The owner provided the house, he provided the utilities, he provided even garden space where you could raise your own garden. And he didn't charge rent. That was part of the salary, if you will. That was part of the benefits of working for him. And this secured to him faithful workers. And it's kind of hard to be late for work when you live right there. And so it was a good deal. We didn't own the house. We didn't own the land that we lived on. But we got the use of it. We had the utilities provided. We had garden place and so on. So the point, God has used this relationship of the landowner and the stewards to teach us a valuable lesson. Now in Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, just before the book of Matthew, Malachi chapter 3, and verses 8 through 12. Malachi chapter 3, verse 8 says, "Will a man rob God?" An interesting question. How are you going to rob God? Yet you have robbed me. This is God speaking to them. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? He says, in tithes and offerings. You're cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open to you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that you shall not have room enough to receive it. And so he asks the question, will a man rob God? And he answers it. He said, in tithes and offerings. When we fail to give our tithe, that is 10%, and offerings to God, which is anything we give above and beyond our tithe, it's robbery, God says. Now, is it robbery because the 10% belongs to God? No. It's robbery because 100% of it belongs to God. Let that sink in. Because an offering is too, and an offering is above and beyond the tithe. It 100% belongs to God. Psalm 24, verse 1. Sometimes we think, well, the 10% belongs. No, it all belongs to God. Notice Psalm 24, verse 1. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. It all belongs to God, even us. We belong to Him. He created us. He gave us life. It's God that created us, not we ourselves. And so the earth and everything in it, including us, all belongs to God. And we need to kind of come to grips with that reality. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. We are merely the stewards or the managers of it, if you will. In Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth. He created it. I mean, He made it. It's His. In Genesis 1, verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So when He gave man dominion, does that mean man owns it or God still owns it? See, Psalms come sometimes later after Genesis. David lived after Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And David in Psalm said, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He retains the ownership of it. He gives us dominion over it, or a charge over it, but that's as stewards over those things. He said, God said, let us make man and let them have dominion. And so God created, verse 27, so God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So God made man, gave man dominion, and He said, now exercise dominion over it. In Genesis 2:15, and the Lord God took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. You know, He was to take care of it. We don't own anything, but we do have possession of things, and that possession is viewed by God as holding it in stewardship to Him. Ownership in human terms. You know, you own a car, you may own a house, you may own many things, humanly speaking, and that ownership is recognized and respected. But it distinguishes between what I, therefore, am personally responsible to God for. And understand that our ownership of things is a distinction between what I am responsible to God for and what somebody else is responsible to God for. I'm not responsible for somebody else's property, the things that they own. I'm responsible for what God has given into my care. And so we are to understand and recognize that distinction, that our ownership of stuff distinguishes what I am the steward of and owe that responsibility to God for. Ownership is what God has given into your trust to hold in stewardship to Him. Now, let us look in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Verse 14. Well, let's back up. Verse 11. Well, verse 7. Let's go back all the way up to verse 7. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks and of water and of fountains, and depths that spring out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey, a land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which He hath given thee. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping His commandments and His judgments and His statutes, which I command thee this day. Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that He might humble thee, and that He might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end. And thou shalt say in thine heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant, which He sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day. And it goes on. But notice, man has that tendency to say, I've worked for this. I've produced this. This is by my labor, the sweat of my face, that I have gained these things. This is mine. No, it's the Lord that gave it to you, that allowed you to do that. It's the Lord that giveth you the power, the ability to get that wealth. So anything you have, yes, you work for it. But in that part of the curse, when man disobeyed God in the garden, and He said, the sweat of your face, you'll eat your bread. You're going to have to labor for your food. You're going to have to work for it. And it's God that gives you the power to get that wealth. It's God that has given it to you. And you are responsible and accountable to God for it. And so that's one of the lessons we see here. And over in Ecclesiastes, one of those, I have become fond of the book of Ecclesiastes over the years, and some of the lessons from it. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, and there are several scriptures here along this same line, but we will use these two. Behold that which I have seen. Now this is Solomon reflecting upon the things he's observed over his life. Behold that which I have seen. It is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life. You know, that's good, that's appropriate. That you enjoy, that you partake of the fruits of your labor. Which God giveth him, for it is his portion. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion. To take his portion. And to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. It's God that giveth you the power to get this wealth. And it's appropriate that you are able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. But remember, it all comes from God. Yet, God does not require that we give 10%. You know, that's just like paying rent. You know, he doesn't require that we turn everything over to him per se. It is good and it's comely that we are able to enjoy our portion of that God allows us to enjoy the fruits of our labor. But he wants us to give 10%. He wants us to be able to give an offering from that bounty. But it's not because he needs it. Just think about that. God is spirit. God is in heaven. He has his throne. The heavens and the earth are his. But does he need our gold? Does he need our cattle to eat? You know, does he need these things to sustain himself? Of course not. And he says so, quite plain. Psalm 50. Verse 18 and 19. Well, is that right? No, 7. I was looking at the wrong reference. Verse 7 through 15. It said, Hear, O my people, and I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. So that's where that quote comes from. The cattle on 1,000 hills are his. But he says, I don't need them to eat. I know all the fowls of the mountains and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer unto God thanksgiving and pay thy vows unto the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver thee, that thou shalt glorify me. But he plainly makes the statements here. He said, if I needed anything, I'm not going to ask you for it. It's all mine to begin with. So why does he require us to give 10% and an offering and considers it robbery when we don't? Well, in Malachi, he gave 2 reasons. He said, first of all, that there might be meat in mine house. Now, in the Old Testament times, the tabernacle, the temple, the priests had no inheritance in the land, per se. The land was divided up and given to the tribes by lot, but the priest had no land inheritance, per se. There were 6 cities of refuge that the priests were allowed to live at and to farm the land outside. And then they went by course. They took turns going to the tabernacle or going to the temple and ministering there. And those that ministered there, it was the portions of that, the offerings that came in, was what they ate. That's what they and their families lived on. And so it's not that God needed it, but it was His way of providing for His servants. He said, there might be meat in my house. My servants need to eat too. He said that was number one. Number two, he said that, prove me now herewith. It's a test. It's a test of our trust in Him. It's a test of our faithfulness. Hebrews 7, verses 4 through 8, and it describes there how that even Aaron in the loins of Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. And he says in that it is a witness that he liveth. It's a witness. He says, now prove me, test. This is a test, and I want you to prove me. Prove my faithfulness. Prove, you put your trust in me that I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to take care of you. If you're faithful and you give that 10% and you give an offering, you're trusting that I'm going to take the remainder and bless it, and it'll be more than enough to take care of you, to meet your needs. It's proof that He liveth. And here we're getting closer to the real purpose of tithing. To test a proof of our faithfulness and trust in Him. In 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2, Paul addresses this idea of stewardship. And that as the churches of the Lord Jesus Christ and the ministers and things, that we are stewards of the mysteries of God. We are stewards of intangible things, of the truths of God's Word. We're to earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered to the saints, because we've been made stewards of these things. The church is the pillar and the ground of the truth, and we're the stewards of that truth, and we're to be faithful in that. But we see too that this idea of stewardship is it's required in a steward that a man be found faithful. How many of the parables did Jesus teach where He talked about the steward and the stewardship, and the steward giving an account of his stewardship? That's what this is. It is a test of our faithfulness as a steward. Our recognition that all that we have belongs to God. And we, through the tithes and offerings, we provide not only, he said, meet the things necessary to sustain the worship and to keep the lights on, to keep the building comfortable, to, those things that are necessary, that the worship of God might be provided for. And then it's also a test of our individual faithfulness, and that God will bless them that are faithful. In Luke 16, Luke 16, verses 1 and 2, and he said also unto his disciples, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said to him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. You know, there's consequences. If we are unfaithful in that stewardship and we have wasted the Lord's goods. See, we're not only responsible for 10%, we're responsible for 100% of the things that God has blessed us with. And if we waste His goods, and remember, was it James says, you have not because you ask not, and you ask and have not because you ask amiss, that you might consume it upon your own lust. So he called him to account. Now notice verse 10. We jump ahead to some of the conclusion and application. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. And the least is talking about the mammon, the worldly possessions that we have. These are the least. And yet we account them as much. But compared to overall and the spiritual things, these are least. And he says, and it's just a principle of human nature. If a person will be faithful in the little things, in the little details, he'll be faithful also in the big details. But if he's not going to be faithful in the little things, don't expect him to be faithful with bigger responsibilities. And that's just a lesson in human nature and understanding. If you're an employer and you have employees, you watch them. You know, you give them little tasks. How do they carry them out? If they're faithful, then you give them bigger tasks, more responsibility. And with that may come promotion and raises in salary. And as an employee, keep that in mind. You know, you've got a little task. It might be cleaning the restrooms. So I'm going to save myself for the big job to be manager. Well, if you're not going to be faithful cleaning the restrooms, don't count on becoming manager. And appointing someone else to clean the restrooms. You know, that's just not going to come to pass. You know, you that are faithful in the little things, the little details, will be faithful also in the big. But if you won't be faithful, then don't expect someone to commit to your trust greater responsibility. Verse 11, if therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, the worldly possessions, those are that's in the context, that's what he's talking about, in the least, in the little things. When we're talking about our relationship with God and our stewardship, if we're not going to be faithful with the material possessions that God has blessed us with right now, it says, who will commit to your trust the true riches? Those material things are not the true riches. Jesus said, a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. So what is life? What does it consist of? He said, I came that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. He's not talking about an abundance of possessions, but peace, joy, happiness, contentment. There's so many other things that make up a person's life and makes that life worth living beyond possessions. Those are the true riches. But don't expect to for God to bless you with those true riches if you're not going to be faithful in the little things. He said, prove me now herewith. And see if I will not pour out upon you, open the windows of heaven, pour out upon you a blessing that you won't have room enough to receive. And that's not necessarily just money, possessions, but those true riches that he's talking about here. It's a test. If we're faithful in the little things, if we're faithful in the unrighteous mammon, and the things that we possess, then God knows we're a faithful steward and He can entrust more things into our care, our keeping. Now it becomes robbery. He said, well, a man robbed God. It becomes robbery because we develop the mindset that the things which we possess belong to us and not to God. And people become resentful when they're told you need to tithe. Why should I give my money to the church? Why should I give my money to God? He doesn't need it. No. That was the attitude of the husbandman of that vineyard, wasn't it? We want all of this for ourselves. We don't want to give anything to God. Let us seize the inheritance. As we read there in Deuteronomy 8:17, and thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. It's mine. That's for the robbery. Just the mindset. This is mine. As we point out, some may even think God's trying to rob them because He requires them to tithe. However, when we understand that God has lovingly provided for our care and joy, and is proving us that He might bless us even more, pour out a blessing that you will not have room enough to receive. Matthew 6, He said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. That's the test. That's the proof. Philippians 4:19, Paul says, but my God shall supply all your need. Now, is He going to supply all your need if you're stingy and refuse to be obedient to His requirement that you give 10% in offering? Is He going to supply all of your need if you're holding back that 10%? I don't think so. He says, prove me now herewith. You've robbed God. And because of this, he lists some of the things that had happened to them. I don't know if it's in Malachi or Habakkuk or Haggai. I get those two confused. They both start with an H. But he's talking about, said, you looked for much and got little. You sowed, and when harvest time came and you wanted to gather in much, it said it's like you was putting in bags that had holes in them. It was leaking out. When you look at your finances, you ever feel like it's like I'm putting money into a bag and there's a hole somewhere and it's just going. I don't even know where it's going. Well, he said, consider your ways. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, he said, now we're to give glory to Him. Now unto Him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. Now He is able, and He has said, I'll pour out a blessing you won't have room enough to receive. Do we believe Him? Do we trust Him with that? Do we trust Him enough that we give as He asks us to do? And think about this. as we read the Scriptures, we study the Scriptures about God. God enjoys demonstrating His love for us, doesn't He? He enjoys demonstrating it. The key to these abundant blessings is our faithfulness with the mammon or material blessings already received. And that's the reason He tells God loveth a cheerful giver. Why? Because He's a cheerful giver. When we go to God and we ask Him for things and He supplies them, do you think He does it grudgingly? Oh man, here you go again. All they want, take. Well, I said I'd bless them, so I guess I have to. Is that the way God? No. He said, He loves a cheerful giver. Now I get that. Now, He loves a cheerful giver because He is a cheerful giver. He loves to show His love for His people. He loves to bless us and see us amazed and see us respond with that love and surprise and joy. You know, don't you love to give a surprise gift to somebody and just see the surprise and joy on their face? Well, if you know how to do that, if you experience that, how much more God? He says, and He uses that comparison. God knows how to give good gifts. He said, if your son comes to you and asks for a fish, you're going to give him a serpent? If he asks for bread, you're going to give him a stone? So if you know how to give good gifts to your children, don't you think God knows how to give good gifts to His? You know? That is the point that He is making. That is why He loves it when we give cheerfully. Because we are to be conformed into His image. God is working, Romans 8:29, I believe it is, being conformed into the image of His Son. God is working to conform us into His image. And part of that image is He loves to bless His people. He loves to see their joy. He loves to see their surprise when He actually does what He says He will do for us. And He loves to see us be able to do the same. It said in James, every good gift, every perfect gift comes down to us from God. God is giving, and He desires us to have a giving spirit like Him. And it begins with tithing. But it's not limited to tithing. Like I said, you know, we're not just responsible to give 10% to God. We're responsible for our management of all of it. 10% is just part of our management, our stewardship job. But how about the rest of it? Well, if you have a neighbor, you have a friend, you have someone who's in need, and you see that need, that's something else. There's an offering. There's a gift that you are able to give. And when we do that, God will bless us, make sure we're not depleted to the point that we are impoverished because we gave someone else. But He sees, well, we're faithful. We're doing what He's wanting. And why would you give like that? Because God put it in your heart to give you a giving spirit, that you want to help someone else. That's part of that stewardship, and to give cheerfully and to not begrudge those things and see it as depleting us of our resources that we've worked so hard for, because it's God that gives you the power to get wealth. He can replace it. He can pour out, give you more than what you had to begin with. And so this is the ultimate lesson in having us to practice good stewardship, to honor and glorify Him by being like Him. Let that just kind of sink in a minute. That is You know, it's just like the Ten Commandments, but what is the ultimate purpose? The underlying principle behind all the commandments is love. You can do all these things, but if you don't have love in your heart when you do them, you've missed the whole point. And that was Paul's point in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. He said, you know, I can do all these. I can speak in tongues. I can give my body and my possessions for the poor. I can do miracles. I can do all these things. But if I don't have love when I do it, it's not worth a thing. See, love is the ultimate purpose and lesson behind those commandments. And the same is true here. The ultimate lesson in our practicing stewardship is we glorify God by being like Him. That's the reason He created man to begin with, to be a companion for Him, to have fellowship with Him, to be like Him. Let us create man in our image, in our likeness. Why? So that man can have fellowship with us. We can have companionship. He wants us to be like Him. And we glorify God when we are. Unto Him be glory. Who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think? He said, prove me now here and see if I won't do this for you. He goes on to say, be holy, for I am holy. He wants us to be like Him. It is not about giving 10%. It's about being faithful and properly managing 100% everything we are and have, because 100% of all we have and are, everything belongs to God. This is stewardship. We are stewards of the mammon of this world. And it's required of a steward that he be found faithful. Stewardship. And Lord willing, this evening I want to bring a companion message on contentment, because I think it goes along with our subject of stewardship. But at this time, let us stand together and remember too, this